Hey guys, welcome back to User Experience Points. This week we're going to look at XCOM, Enemy Unknown. Now, I want to preface this with the fact that I adore this game. The turn-based combat is engaging, and it's one of those rare games where the narrative is crafted by your experience rather than written around gameplay. I put dozens of hours into it, and it was one of my favorite games that came out in 2012. I just wanted to make sure I clarified that before I tell you guys that this game has a very uneven and often very poor user experience. Except for when you're in combat, that's great, but we'll get to that. So let's look at the title screen, in particular the first three options that are available to you. We have single player, multiplayer, and load game. Single player is the label used for what is essentially starting a new game, which is a little bit confusing, especially since load game is separated from it and load game only applies to single player. One would expect maybe selecting single player would then give you the option to either load or start a new game. Starting a new game is a confusing experience all on its own, especially if you've unlocked some of the other options that are available after your first playthrough. This leaves you with two submenus that look different and are mapped to different buttons that you probably would miss entirely if you just selected your difficulty and then moved on. Cramming everything on screen like this might be fast for someone who's played through the game a few times and knows their way around the menus, but it still looks terrible, and for anyone who may have been jumping back into the game, I would expect that they would miss these options entirely. The advanced options, since there's only two of them, probably could just be on this screen right under the difficulty, but a whole list of toggles from the second wave option should probably pop up after you select your difficulty on its own screen. This would make starting a new game more of a step-by-step process instead of the confusing, unorganized mess that it is right now. Things are not much better in the options menu. First of all, it's terribly organized. The interface menu only has one option, toggling subtitles, which could have easily fit into the gameplay section. Literally, there's an inexplicable space in the gameplay section where another toggle could have fit. The controls are also all over the screen. There's no specific place you can look when you need to find out what you need to press to do something. And considering how much space is left over in this menu, it would have been nice to see some descriptions, especially for things like Action Cam. What's Action Cam? There would be even more space for descriptions if the menu items were placed in any consistent way, but they're just kind of all over the place. They're not even like aligned the same way depending on which section you're in. I'm not sure what happened here. This thing just seems so cobbled together. The main menu that you use between missions for buying stuff, upgrading your soldiers, management, research, all the XCOM operations is actually really great at first. One thing that I somehow didn't even notice the entire time I played the game is that you can pan around and zoom in to see all of your little facilities you've built. That's pretty cool. The top section of this menu's hierarchy is also very nicely designed. Each of the main sections brings down a list of submenus. You can navigate between these top sections with either the D-pad or with the left and right bumpers. Mapping the navigation between these sections to multiple inputs on the controller is a smart choice, because player expectations on how to use this type of menu will vary, since it's a common menu pattern that is often tackled in different ways in other games. Once you start digging into these sub-menus, things get a little crazy. I can't spend too much time going into detail on all these because there's so many of them, but the main overall point here is that there's absolutely zero consistency. There's no established design patterns that are being reused to make it a more consistent user experience. It's all over the place. Every menu feels like it was designed by a different team. The uneven quality of these menus really demonstrates this. For example, in the ships menu, the headings are inexplicably on the bottom, and on the screen where you buy items, the materials that you need are in 3 different places. I can excuse a bad title screen and options experience because that's the type of thing that probably gets pushed aside during development, but this menu is used constantly by players. When they're not in combat, they're here managing things, and it should have been easier. Well, this has been kind of a downer so far. Thankfully, I can tell you that I absolutely love this game's combat interface. It's elegantly delegated to the bottom of the screen, leaving you plenty of room to interpret all the other information that you have to process, like your soldiers' health and what's going on in the environment. The on-screen controls are very visible, so it's super easy to tell which parts of this interface are mapped to button shortcuts. There's some pretty heavy icon usage here, but you can always access an explanation of what they mean. Once you're ready to have one of your soldiers attack, the interface is pared down to only the information you need to complete this process. This includes icons that represent how many enemies are on screen and which one you have targeted, and a very nice breakdown that shows the probability of success depending on which action you've selected. Ugh, I love it. This combat is so good. In fact, when I was recording footage for this section, I actually just kind of got absorbed and started playing and ended up with way too much footage. It's unfortunate that the rest of the XCOM experience didn't get this much polish. And that's all I've got for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, you should definitely subscribe if you haven't already, because I upload a new episode of UXP every Friday. I'll leave you with a fun fact about XCOM. March 1st, 2015 is when the game's story starts, so keep an eye out for aliens. And with that, I'll see you next week.